The land was dry, wide, and scarred by sun and wind. It stretched so far you could lose your name out here if you weren't careful. Ridges of red stone cut the sky like jagged teeth, and brush lay brittle across the soil, rattling whenever the breeze picked up. Coyotes didn't bother to hide. They moved like ghosts just beyond sight. The year was 1877, and the edge of New Mexico territory still hadn't decided if it wanted to be wild or dead. Wyatt Finch didn't care much either way. He rode a dun-colored gelding, reins loose in his hand, his jaw lined with stubble that hadn't been cleaned up in weeks. His hat was low, keeping the sun off his eyes, though nothing could block the weight behind him. The kind of heaviness that stayed even after a man left the war. His Union coat had long since turned to tatters, the brass buttons dulled by dust. He wore it anyway. He hadn't come this far south for justice or revenge. He wasn't even sure why he'd kept going. Maybe it was the silence. After all the screaming and smoke of the past, silence had a kind of mercy in it. He'd left behind a homestead buried in overgrowth, a cabin where laughter once lived and didn't anymore. The trail he'd taken twisted around scrub hills and dried-up creeks, skirting places with names folks didn't write down. People said Apache still ran parts of these lands, but it wasn't the warriors he was worried about. It was the kind of men who moved without purpose or honor. He'd seen too many of those wearing blue, and too many after the war pretending they were something they weren't. His canteen was nearly empty. That's what had pulled him off the trail and toward the cluster of rocks cutting across the flat. It wasn't even a spring, just a shaded patch near an overhang that might offer a trickle. The sun had started to dip when he dismounted, letting the gelding rest while he climbed the rocks slow, careful. That's when he saw them. Two figures tied to the base of a wide stone, hands behind their backs, ankles bound tight. He blinked once, not sure he believed it at first. The wind had pulled their hair loose, long black strands blowing across skin darkened by sun and bruises. They weren't moving. One slumped sideways, the other upright but shaking. He didn't move for a second, just stared, trying to understand if this was real or something dredged from the worst parts of his memory. But the sharp cry of a hawk overhead snapped him back. He stepped down, quiet as he could. His boots stirred dust, but nothing else. As he got closer, he saw the older one first. A woman maybe in her late 20s, mouth bloodied, cheeks swollen. Her eyes opened and locked onto him like a wolf caught in a snare. No fear, just a fire behind them that told him she'd fight if she could. The other was younger, 17 maybe. Her body was shaking so bad, she couldn't even lift her head. He knelt beside them and saw the cuts. Deep rope burns. The heat had already turned their skin raw. The younger girl whimpered when he reached for the knot, and the older woman said something sharp in a language he couldn't understand. He raised both hands and spoke low. "I ain't here to hurt you." She didn't believe him. Of course she didn't. He wouldn't have either. Wyatt worked fast, cutting their ties with his knife. Once their hands were free, the older woman fell forward and caught herself with her elbows. The younger one collapsed into his arms before she could stop herself. She was barely conscious, lips cracked, throat moving like she was trying to swallow air. They needed water. Shelter. He had neither. He half-dragged, half-carried them both back to his horse, and secured them the best he could. It was slow going. The girl couldn't sit upright, and the woman flinched every time he touched her. But they didn't have the strength to fight him off, not really. He rode double, the woman behind him, the girl cradled in front. The nearest patch of cover was a gulch he'd passed earlier, where a few rocks had created a narrow shelf of shade and still air. By the time he got them there, the sky had started bleeding red. He set the girl down gently and offered the last of his water. She sipped it, eyes fluttering before drifting out again. The older woman refused the canteen. She watched him like a cage thing, like the second she got her legs back, she'd bolt. Or kill him. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. Wyatt started a small fire, low and slow, so the smoke wouldn't rise. He had jerky and hard bread, and he sets them out without forcing them to eat. He'd seen men come back from the brink of death before. You didn't push. You let them return on their own. He sat apart from them, his back against the rock, eyes scanning the horizon. He hadn't seen any other riders, but whoever left those women like that could still be near. And the kind of men who do that don't leave things half done. The girl coughed in her sleep. Her skin was hot with fever. The older one crawled over to her and pressed her forehead to hers, murmuring something Wyatt couldn't hear. Her voice was cracked, but the sound was soft, like she'd been holding it in for too long. He watched without staring. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. Night crept in slow, dragging the cold with it. Desert cold, sharp and unforgiving. He gave them his coat and kept the fire close, sleep never coming. His hand rested near his rifle the whole time, his eyes never closing all the way. Something in him was shifting. He didn't like it. Wyatt Finch had spent years building walls he didn't name. Walls that kept out memories, people, pain. But the way the girl had clung to his shirt, the way the woman had refused to let her go even after nearly dying, it stirred something he thought he'd buried under war and silence. By morning, the girl could open her eyes again. She didn't speak, just stared at the sky like she couldn't believe it wasn't the end. The woman, hoarse but steady now, pointed to herself and said, "Tala." Then she pointed to the girl. "Naeli." Wyatt gave a small nod. He didn't give his name. He didn't know what came next. Didn't know why he hadn't just left them there for someone else to find. Maybe because he already knew no one was coming. Maybe because leaving them would have been like leaving a part of himself, some old version of him that still remembered what it felt like to care. He didn't know their story yet, but he could see it on them. The broken pieces, the fight to stay human, the way Tala looked at him like she didn't trust him, but maybe, just maybe, needed him. And the girl, Naeli, had started to reach for his hand in her sleep. He told himself it didn't matter, that he'd leave them near the next settlement and be on his way. But as the sun climbed again and lit the red rocks like fire, Wyatt felt the first tug of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, or something close to it. Tala hadn't spoken much since they left the gulch. She rode behind Wyatt, one hand gripping the saddle horn, the other never far from her sister's shoulder. Naeli still hadn't said a word. She blinked slow, sometimes looking at the sky, sometimes just at the dust rising from the horse's hooves. Her fever had broken, but she stayed pale and quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't come from sickness alone. Wyatt had seen that kind before. It came from being hurt in a way that didn't leave bruises on the skin, but cut deep anyway. They were 3 days' ride from anywhere decent. The only place Wyatt trusted to take shelter was an old way station near an abandoned telegraph line. Long dead now, but still standing. He didn't know if it had food or water, but it had a roof and 4 walls, and that was enough. Tala hadn't asked where they were going. She kept her jaw tight and her shoulders square. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stayed alert, always watching. Sometimes Wyatt caught her looking at him like she was trying to figure him out. Like maybe she wanted to believe he wasn't the same as whoever tied them up, but couldn't risk being wrong again. They reached the station late afternoon. The sun had bleached the roof boards, and the door hung a little crooked, but it still opened with a groan. Wyatt tied the horse to the post out front and carried Naeli inside. She'd started trembling again. Tala followed, limping slightly, and the moment they crossed the threshold, she dropped beside her sister and wrapped both arms around her. Wyatt stood back and let them have the silence. He set his rifle against the wall and checked the back of the building. Empty. Nothing but an old cot, some broken shelves, and a half-rotted crate that once held salt pork. He made a fire again and cooked what little he had. He offered food to them first, and this time Tala accepted. She fed Naeli small bites before taking any for herself. Watching them, Wyatt couldn't help but notice how strong she was. Not in the way men usually thought of it, but in how she moved, how she didn't flinch at the cold or the pain or even his presence. That night, while the fire cracked low and the wind moved outside like breath through the cracks in the boards, Tala finally spoke. They left us to die. Her voice was flat, dry, but it cut the silence like a knife. Wyatt didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the fire. Who? She didn't answer at first. Then she said, white men. 4, maybe 5. They said they were looking for Apache. Said we were spies. Liars. She paused, then added, they weren't soldiers. Just men with guns and too much hate. Wyatt felt his jaw clench, but he didn't interrupt. They came in the dark, took us from the camp while everyone else was asleep. Our father. Her throat closed for a second. He tried to stop them. They beat him. He couldn't walk after. Wyatt shifted, slowly, finally turning his face toward her. The firelight made her eyes shine. She didn't blink. Where's your family now? She looked at him for a long time. Buried, or scattered. Nayeli stirred beside her, mumbling in her sleep. Tala hushed her gently, brushing the girl's cheek with a soft hand. She hasn't spoken since that night, Tala said. She was always soft, always quiet, but now she won't even look me in the eye. Like something's missing inside her. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't even shake. But the pain behind it was clear. Wyatt said nothing. What could he say? That the world was cruel? That men did evil without reason? She already knew that. The next morning, Wyatt rode out early, leaving the two of them in the safety of the station. He needed food, water, maybe some bandages. There was a small settlement about 10 miles south, just a handful of shacks, a store, and a church run by a man called Elder Levi. Wyatt had passed through once before. Levi didn't ask questions and didn't preach unless asked. Wyatt traded an old belt buckle and a flask for some canned beans, flour, and clean bandages. When Levi asked why he needed them, Wyatt just said, somebody got hurt. That was enough. Levi handed him an extra can and nodded once. You still running from ghosts, Finch? He asked quietly, brushing dust from the steps. Wyatt didn't look back. Are we all? He returned to find Nayeli awake and sitting upright. She still didn't speak, but she tracked him with her eyes now. Tala was boiling water in an old tin pot over the fire. She nodded once at the supplies, then turned back to the flames. The days that followed passed in slow silence. Wyatt didn't press them. He fixed what he could around the station, patched the door, cleaned the shelves, dug a hole out back for waste. The kind of work that kept a man's hands busy and his mind quiet. It was 2 days later when the next crack in the silence came. Tala was washing a strip of cloth when she asked, why'd you stop? Wyatt didn't need her to explain. He knew she meant the day he found them. He shrugged. Didn't seem right, leaving you there. She watched him long and hard. Men who do right things usually want something. I didn't. Not then. But now? He met her eyes. Still don't. Tala held his gaze a while longer, then looked away. She's all I have, she said quietly. If you hurt her, I'll cut your throat in your sleep. Wyatt didn't smile, but he respected her more for saying it. Fair. He didn't try to tell her she was safe. Words didn't mean anything until time proved them true. He just kept showing up, day after day, without raising his voice or hand. He let her see that he wasn't in a hurry, and he wasn't pretending. One afternoon, Nayeli came and sat beside him while he sharpened his knife. She didn't speak, but she leaned her head against his arm and closed her eyes. Wyatt froze for a second, unsure what to do. Tala looked up from where she was sweeping the floor and didn't say anything. But her eyes softened, just a little. By the end of the week, the wind started carrying spring in it. Little green weeds pushed through the cracks near the steps. Wyatt knew they couldn't stay there forever. Supplies would run out, and word might spread about the two girls. Outlaws, soldiers, or worse could come through. But the thought of letting them go, of letting Tala go, started to feel like losing something he didn't know he needed. One night, Tala sat across from him, the fire throwing shadows up her face. She loved birds, she said suddenly. Nayeli. She used to wake up early just to watch them fly across the hills. Wyatt nodded slowly. You should take her somewhere they still fly. Tala's mouth twisted. Where would that be? He didn't answer, but in his mind, he saw it. A place farther west, maybe near the river. Somewhere green, where no one asked her name, and girls could chase birds again. They didn't speak after that for a long time, but something had changed. Not everything, but something. It was the beginning of trust, and that's all it needed to be. For now, the wind changed. Wyatt felt it in his chest before he heard it in the trees. Sharp cold, biting in a way that didn't belong to spring. Something in the air shifted, like the land itself was holding its breath. He learned a long time ago to listen when the quiet grew too deep. That kind of silence usually came before blood. It was morning. Tala and Nayeli were gathering wild onions near the creek bed that curved along the edge of the hills, and Wyatt was patching a tear in the saddlebag. He kept his rifle near, but didn't feel the usual prickle of worry. It had been nearly 2 weeks since he found them, and the danger had seemed to fade in the rhythm of survival. Fires, foraging, hauling water, washing clothes. He let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were safe. That illusion cracked around noon. A horse, then another, then a third. He heard them before he saw them. 3 riders moving slow through the low brush. Wyatt stood and grabbed his rifle. The station was set low behind a ridge, which gave him just enough cover to crouch near the rocks. He watched as the men came closer. He knew the one in front, Emmett Cage. The last time Wyatt had seen Emmett, he was burning a homestead outside of El Paso with 2 other deserters, laughing while the family inside screamed. Wyatt had pointed a gun at him back then. Should have pulled the trigger. He didn't. Now, Emmett wore a broad-brimmed black hat and a long gray coat. His beard had grown thick, but the smile was still the same, crooked, cruel. His 2 men looked the part too. Sun-bitten skin, rifles tied to their saddles, pistols easy at the hip. Men who'd done things and forgotten why. Wyatt backed away from the ridge and moved fast. He reached the creek just as Tala caught sight of his face and froze. "Get her inside," he said low, pointing to Nayeli. Now, Tala didn't ask questions. She scooped her sister up and followed Wyatt back toward the station, her steps fast but steady. Once inside, Wyatt pulled the rifle from the corner and loaded it slow, keeping his breath even. He didn't want to fight, but Emmett never came for peace. The hoofbeats stopped maybe 20 yards out. Then a shout. "Wyatt Finch." Emmett's voice rang across the dust like thunder. "You still playing the saint out here? Heard you found yourself a little lost bird. Or 2. Tala stiffened behind him. Nayeli tucked her face against her sister's stomach, trembling again. Wyatt stepped out into the open, rifle slung across his shoulder. He walked slow, calm, stopping just past the porch. Emmett smiled wide. "There he is. I was hoping I heard right." "You can keep hoping," Wyatt said, "but I ain't giving you a damn thing." Emmett dismounted in one smooth motion, tossing his reins to one of the others. "See now, that's not very hospitable. You always were a cold bastard, but I figured you'd have manners by now. You're 3 weeks too late. They're not yours." Emmett's smile turned sharp. "They weren't yours either." Wyatt felt the weight of every breath. He didn't know how Emmett had tracked them. Maybe word had traveled from that settlement. Maybe someone saw 2 girls with a white man and decided to talk. Either way, it didn't matter now. What mattered was that Emmett thought he could take them. Inside, Tala stood near the door, her face unreadable. She understood enough English to follow what was being said. Her body was still, but her eyes never left the window. Wyatt had seen that look before, somewhere between rage and terror. "What do you want, Emmett?" Wyatt said, "I want what's owed." He moved closer, boots crunching dry earth. "They ran from a bounty, you know. One of them's a killer. Or so the paper says." Wyatt raised his rifle halfway. "That paper say who wrote it?" Emmett laughed. "Ain't that just like you? Still thinking rules apply out here." He leaned in slightly. "Look, Finch, you can walk. Leave the Redskins. Nobody'll fault you. You did your part." Wyatt didn't blink. "No." Emmett sighed. "Then I reckon this is the part where somebody bleeds." Behind him, his men shifted. One pulled his rifle. The other stepped wide, trying to flank. Wyatt moved first. He ducked, rolled, and fired. The man to Emmett's right fell hard, screaming as his thigh burst red. Tala burst through the door, rifle in her hands, Wyatt's old backup, and fired straight at the second rider. The shot missed, but forced him down behind a bush. Emmett dived for cover behind his horse. Wyatt grabbed Tala and dragged her inside, slamming the door shut as bullets ripped into the wooden boards. They didn't speak. Didn't have to. Wyatt shoved the table against the front window while Tala reloaded. Nayeli sat in the corner, her arms tight around her knees, eyes wide. The fear in her was so strong, it filled the room like smoke. "They won't stop," Tala said quietly. "They'll burn this place down." Wyatt knew she was right. They were outgunned. The only advantage was the station's stone walls and Emmett's arrogance. Wyatt knelt beside the window and peered through a crack. Emmett was crouched behind a rock, maybe 30 yards out. He looked like he was thinking. Wyatt turned to Tala. "If we stay, we die." She met his eyes. "Then we leave." He nodded once. "Back window. I'll draw them. You take her and run south. Follow the dry creek. It'll split near a cave. Hide there. I'll come when it's clear." Tala grabbed Nayeli's hand. "No, we go together. You can't carry her and shoot," Wyatt said. "I'll handle it. You just keep her alive." Tala stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. Wyatt stepped back outside with both hands up, no weapon visible. Emmett rose just slightly. "You ready to talk now, Finch?" Wyatt shrugged. "You want them? Come take them." The shot was fast. Emmett's bullet grazed his side, and Wyatt Dove rolled and fired back. One of the other men screamed again. Gunfire tore through the air. Dust exploded around him. Inside, Tala and Nayeli slipped out the back window and vanished into the hills. Wyatt kept firing. Eventually, the bullets stopped. Silence returned, tight, dangerous. Emmett's voice came again. "You really gonna die for a pair of squaws, Wyatt?" Wyatt's voice was calm. "Better than living as the kind of man you turned into." Emmett cursed and ran forward. Wyatt shot him mid-charge. The bullet caught him just under the collarbone. He staggered, fell, rolled, then stayed down. Wyatt stood slowly, chest heaving, side bleeding. The last man dropped his rifle and fled. The fight was over. Wyatt didn't chase him. He walked over to Emmett, who lay choking, blood pooling under him. Emmett looked up, eyes wild. "They're just nothing." Wyatt leaned down. "They're more than you ever were." He stayed by the body until the breath left it. By the time he made it to the cave, the sun was low. The shadows stretched long across the rocks. He found them huddled at the mouth of the cave, Tala holding her sister close, both of them tense. He raised one hand. "It's done." Tala stared at him for a long second. Then she stood, walked to him, and without a word, pulled his coat aside and pressed her hand to the wound at his side. "You're bleeding," she said. "So are you," he answered, looking at her eyes. Something in both of them cracked, and neither of them tried to stop it. They didn't speak of Emmett again. But everything changed after that, because now they knew the past could find you. It could try to pull you under. But sometimes, with enough fight and the right people, you could stand again, even if your hands still shook, even if the scars never faded. You could still choose not to become like the men who broke you. And for the first time in a long time, Wyatt Finch knew exactly where he wanted to be. The air after violence always felt too quiet, like the world was ashamed of what it had just allowed. The morning after Emmett Cage bled out in the dust, the wind moved soft through the trees, and birds chirped like nothing had changed. But inside the cave, everything had. Wyatt leaned against the rock wall, shirt pulled up while Tala pressed a cloth to the wound at his ribs. She'd already cleaned it, her hands steady, her jaw tight. She didn't speak, not at first. Nayeli sat just a few feet away, curled up in the corner with her arms around her knees. Her face was turned to the wall, her silence now heavier than before. The pain in Wyatt's side pulsed, hot and sharp, but he said nothing. He did worse. What troubled him more was the look in Tala's eyes. Not fear, not anger, something in between. Something deeper, a kind of weight she hadn't let him see before. "You killed him," she finally said, voice low. Wyatt nodded. I did. He was the one who... She didn't finish. Her voice cut off like the rest of that sentence was too dirty to say out loud. He helped take us, she said instead. Wyatt's eyes stayed steady on hers. I figured. She sat back on her heels, staring at her hands now. I don't feel anything about it. I thought I would. Relief. Peace. Something. What do you feel? She shook her head. Like it's not over. Like he was just one head of the snake. Like it'll never be over. He reached for his coat, slowly pulling it over his shoulder with a grunt. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the things people do, they don't just end when the body drops. They live in your bones. Tala looked at him for a long time. You've carried a lot of bones, haven't you? He didn't answer. She already knew. For 2 days, they stayed near the cave. Wyatt was too weak to ride, and Tala didn't trust the quiet just yet. She'd seen what the world did after hope. It punished people for having it. She kept a knife in her boot, one hand always on Nayeli's shoulder. The girl had barely spoken still, but her eyes now followed Tala's every move, and when Wyatt coughed or groaned in his sleep, she flinched. Tala watched her sister and wondered if she'd ever be a child again, if laughter would come back, or if it had been taken forever by men who thought skin color made someone lesser. She wanted to believe it hadn't. She wanted to believe that Wyatt's kindness meant something, that not every man took and broke and disappeared. But belief came hard to her. She'd seen too many lies wearing kindness like a coat. Still, she couldn't deny the way he'd looked at Nayeli, the way he'd risked his life, the way he hadn't expected anything back. One night, while Wyatt was asleep and his breathing finally even, Tala sat near the fire with Nayeli beside her, half dozing. The fire cracked, and she stared into the flames, whispering, "What do we do now?" It wasn't a question for Wyatt. It wasn't even a question she expected an answer to. But he opened his eyes anyway and said, "We keep going." "Where?" she asked. "There's no one left. No tribe, no land. We go east, they don't want us. West, they sell us. North, they shoot us." He shifted slowly, wincing. "And we go south. We go where no one knows who we are. Start again." Tala shook her head. "I don't know how to start again." "You already have," he said. "You started the second you took her hand and ran." She looked down at Nayeli, who now leaned against her. She hasn't spoken in over 2 weeks. Wyatt's voice was quiet. "She will. When she's ready. You don't have to fix her." Tala's voice broke. "But I'm all she has." Wyatt didn't argue. He knew what it meant to be someone's only anchor. What it cost. They left the cave on the 3rd morning. Wyatt walked beside the horse instead of riding it, limping slightly but pushing forward. They made their way to a river valley Wyatt remembered from long ago, green, hidden, where old trappers once built cabins before they vanished into history. When they reached it, it felt like a dream. The grass was real and the water clear. Birds circled the edge of the trees. There was even a crumbling shack, half eaten by moss and time. Wyatt repaired the roof first. Tala dug a fire pit. Nayeli found a feather and tucked it into her hair. It was the first time she'd reached for something. That night, after they'd eaten boiled beans and dried fish, Tala sat beside Wyatt and said, "I was angry you found us." He turned his head. "Because I didn't want saving," she explained. "I didn't want to owe anything to anyone. And when you gave us water, I thought maybe you were just like the rest, pretending to be decent until you had the power." Wyatt didn't take offense. He just looked at her. "And now," Tala swallowed, "now I'm scared I was wrong. Because if you're different and we lose you too, then I don't know how to believe in anything anymore." Wyatt didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, "You don't have to believe in me. Just in this. The fire. The roof. The way she looks at you like you're the whole sky. That's real." Tala turned her face to the flames. "But what about when the next man comes? The next Emmett?" Wyatt's jaw clenched. "Then I'll be ready." She glanced sideways at him. "Even if it kills you?" "Especially then," he said. And that was the moment Tala let herself cry. Not loud, not wild, but real. Tears that she didn't wipe away because they belonged here among people who had also been broken and still stood up each day. The days stretched. Naeli began to whisper words. At first just one at a time. Bird, water, Tala. Then more when no one asked her to. When she was ready, Wyatt watched the two of them from the distance sometimes. He didn't try to belong. He didn't try to replace anything. But his presence became steady, reliable. He hunted, built, repaired. He showed up. That was all he had left to give. And slowly, Tala began to stand beside him. Not behind him. Not under his protection, but shoulder to shoulder. She asked him once what he'd done before the war. He told her. A teacher. She laughed, the first time he'd heard it. You don't look like a man who'd hold a book, she said. I didn't look like a killer either, he replied. That stopped the laugh, but it didn't kill the warmth. They didn't speak of love. It wasn't time, but something lived between them now. Something built not from longing, but from trust. From choosing to keep walking beside someone even when the road kept breaking. One evening, Naeli ran through the field chasing a rabbit. Her bare feet flashed against the grass. Her laughter rang across the hill. Tala watched her and smiled. Wyatt stepped beside her and said, She's coming back. Tala didn't look at him, just said, Maybe we are too. He nodded, and neither of them said more. Because some things didn't need saying. They just needed time. And space. And the right kind of quiet. It started with smoke. Not from their fire. Not from anything they'd done. This was dark, thick smoke rising fast in the west, curling up above the trees like a warning. Wyatt spotted it first while he was cutting wood near the ridge, and his breath caught. He set the axe down slow, eyes narrowing at the black smudge staining the sky. Tala came out of the cabin, wiping her hands, saw the look on his face, and didn't need to ask. They're coming, she said quietly. I don't know yet, Wyatt replied. Could be a fire. Could be men. Tala glanced back toward the trees where Naeli was kneeling by the creek, playing with river stones. Her heart jumped in her throat. Without thinking, she started toward her sister, calling her name sharp and low. Naeli looked up, saw her face, and came running. Wyatt didn't wait long. He grabbed his rifle and a revolver he kept under the floorboards, strapping both to his belt. Tala packed fast, water skins, what food they had, a blanket. She didn't ask what the plan was. They didn't have time for planning, only surviving. But deep down, they both knew this wasn't just a fire. Wyatt had seen this before. Scorched earth tactics, burning fields to flush people out. It was the kind of thing desperate men did when they didn't want to leave witnesses behind. He didn't know who had sent them. Maybe it was Emmett's last living crony looking for revenge. Maybe it was a lawman who'd heard rumors and didn't care who got hurt as long as he got paid. Maybe it was just the land, doing what it always did, trying to erase people like Tala and Naeli. By nightfall, the smoke was closer. The air burned the inside of their noses, and ash began to drift through the trees. Naeli coughed and clung to Tala's hand while Wyatt led them along the creek, moving south fast and quiet. The stars blinked overhead, cold and distant, and every snapping branch sounded like a rifle cocking. They didn't light a fire that night. They didn't sleep. By morning, the smell of burnt timber filled their lungs. Wyatt found a higher slope and climbed it, scanning the distance. What he saw turned his stomach. For riders. Just silhouettes at first, but getting closer. One of them carried a long gun on his back. Another had something hanging from his saddle, a length of rope already knotted. Wyatt felt his jaw lock. They were being hunted. He climbed back down fast. We can't keep running, he said. They're too close. Tala stood stiff, holding Naeli close, her own eyes rimmed red from smoke. What do we do? Wyatt looked at them both, then at the hills beyond. There's a canyon. South Ridge. Narrow pass. One way in, one way out. And they follow us in. I'll hold them there. Tala stared at him. Alone. They'll come thinking they've cornered us. That's when you get her through the other end. You follow the canyon east. It cuts through to the valley near that old missionary outpost. Her grip on Naeli tightened. And if they kill you, he looked down. Then they stop with me. Tala shook her head hard. No, No, you don't get to do that. Not after everything. You don't get to carry this alone. I'm not trying to be a hero, Wyatt said, quiet. I'm just the only one who can slow them down. You said it yourself. She needs you. Tala's throat ached. And what about me? You think I haven't already lost enough? He stepped closer, took her hand, and pressed it to his chest. His heartbeat was hard and steady under her palm. I know, he said, but I can't let them take either of you. Not again. Tala wanted to scream, to curse him, to beg him to run with them instead. But she saw it in his face. He had already made peace with the cost. And somehow, that broke her more than fear ever could. She looked at Nayeli, who was staring between them with wide, quiet eyes. Will you come back? The girl asked softly. Wyatt knelt beside her, touched her shoulder. I'll try. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a promise. It was all he had. They moved fast, slipping through the brush toward the canyon just after dawn. The pass was steep, its walls high and jagged. Wyatt led them halfway in, then stopped, turning to Tala one last time. You'll know it's safe when you hear silence. If there's no silence, keep going. She reached out and grabbed his sleeve, her mouth open but no words coming. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Thank you for letting me be part of something real. Then he turned and walked back the way they came. Tala held Nayeli's hand and kept walking. The wind shifted again. The first rider entered the canyon less than 20 minutes later. Wyatt was ready. He crouched behind a boulder, rifle raised. The shot rang out and echoed down the narrow rock walls, dropping the lead horse and sending the others scattering. Gunfire lit up the canyon. Bullets chipped stone. Wyatt ducked low, heart hammering, smoke in his lungs. He waited, moved positions, fired again. One man down, then another. But the third was smarter. He looped high along the ridge, flanking from above. Wyatt saw him too late. The bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him backward into the dust. His vision blurred, and blood soaked his side. But he got up, limping, bleeding. He didn't stop. He fired again, and the third man fell from the ridge with a scream that cut short. Only one left now. Wyatt turned, gripping the revolver in his left hand. His right arm was useless, hanging limp at his side. He staggered behind a rock, breathing hard, listening. Then a voice, deep, mocking familiar. You really think you're some kind of savior, Finch? The last man stepped into view, rifle pointed. Wyatt straightened. No, just a man who got tired of watching people like you win. The gunshot came fast, but not from the canyon. It came from the ridge behind the last man. He jerked forward, a look of shock spreading across his face before he collapsed, dust kicking up around him. Wyatt looked up, barely able to raise his head. Tala stood there, rifle in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. She ran to him, dropping beside him, her hands already pressing at the wound in his chest. You said to keep going. He smiled weakly. You never listen. She laughed, tears sliding down her face. Damn right I don't. Wyatt coughed, blood at the corner of his mouth. She's safe. She's waiting. But I told her I was coming back for you. He closed his eyes for a second. Then I guess I better stay. Tala didn't move for a long time. She just held his hand and let the canyon go quiet around them. And when the wind finally stopped, there was silence. Real silence. The kind you get when a fight is over and someone chose love over fear. The kind that says, you survived. The sky above the canyon turned gold, softening the sharp edges of the rock and making the dust hang like mist. Wind moved slow again, not in fear or warning, but as if the land itself was exhaling. Tala sat with her back against the stone, Wyatt leaning against her, half conscious but breathing. She held a strip of fabric to his wound, her fingers sticky with blood, but her grip never loosened. He kept drifting in and out, eyes fluttering, jaw tight with pain, but every time he slipped too far, she spoke softly, his name, her name, things she remembered from when they first met in the gulch. Not promises, just facts, grounding things, real things. You fixed that porch step, she whispered. You whittled that spoon for Nayeli. She smiled bitterly. She still says it's ugly, but she keeps it under her bed. Wyatt chuckled, just barely. She's not wrong. The blood didn't stop completely, but it slowed, and eventually, when the sun was full over the ridge, she knew he would live. Not easily, not without scars, but live. They rested there a while longer. The weight of the fight still lingered in the air, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind of weight that tells you something terrible has passed, and you're still here to feel the ache of it. That mattered. They left the canyon together, Wyatt leaning on her shoulder. They walked slow, step by step, until they found Naeli again waiting under a tree, her arms wrapped around her knees. When she saw them, she jumped up and ran toward them, her face filled with a fear she hadn't yet learned how to name. "Is he okay?" she asked. "He's stubborn," Tala said, smiling faintly. "Of course he is." Naeli took Wyatt's other arm, and the three of them kept walking through the trees, past the last whisper of smoke, into land that smelled like grass and water again. They reached the outpost a day later. It wasn't much, just a broken cross, a roof half caved in, a few stone benches left from when someone believed the desert could be made holy. But it was shelter, and it was safe. Tala made a fire, boiled water, and cleaned Wyatt's wounds again. Naeli found a tin cup and made him drink something that tasted like dirt and wildflowers. He didn't complain. They stayed there through the week. Long enough for Wyatt to sit up on his own. Long enough for Tala to breathe again without listening for footsteps. Long enough for Naeli to draw birds in the dirt with a stick. And slowly, something shifted inside all of them. Tala didn't realize when she stopped waking in the middle of the night with her hand on her knife, or when she started smiling more than frowning. She didn't realize the moment she stopped thinking of Wyatt as someone who saved her and started thinking of him as someone who belonged beside her. Naeli laughed again, real laughter. She picked wildflowers and tucked them into Tala's braid. She even began to hum little songs under her breath, ones their mother used to sing. That sound, soft and off-key, broke Tala's heart and mended it at the same time. One evening, as the sun set behind the ridge and turned the sky to blood and fire, Wyatt stepped outside, leaning on the frame of the door. Tala followed and stood beside him, arms folded. "You still think we'll find peace out here?" she asked. He took a deep breath, let it out slow. "I think we already did." She looked at him, her eyes still wary, but softer now. For how long? Long enough to matter. They watched the stars blink to life one by one. The kind of sky you only saw when the land was empty and wide, where no walls blocked the view. It was a sky that made people feel small and brave at the same time. Wyatt turned to her. "I don't expect you to trust the world again, but maybe you can trust this. Me. Her. Us." Tala didn't speak right away. Then she said, "I don't trust easy. You know that." "I don't ask you to," he replied. "Just don't shut the door before we even try." She looked at him, then really looked at the man who had seen her bound and broken and still treated her like she mattered, who stood in front of danger without asking anything in return, who now waited, not with demands, but with quiet patience. "I'm tired of fighting alone," she said. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "I ain't going anywhere," he said. Naeli came to the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her voice sleepy. "Is it morning yet?" Tala smiled. "No, sweet girl. Just a new night." The girl walked between them and leaned her head against Wyatt's side, wrapping her arms around his waist. Wyatt looked down, surprised, then rested his hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. The next morning, they started south again, not to run, but to move forward. There was a small valley near the river Wyatt remembered. He said it had soft land and clear water. Tala said she'd believe it when she saw it. Naeli just asked if there were birds. As they walked, Wyatt thought about how he'd gotten here, about the blood he'd spilled and the silence he'd once craved. He thought about the version of himself that once believed he was too broken to matter. He looked at Tala, walking ahead, her braids swinging behind her. He looked at Naeli skipping ahead of them both, pointing at trees and rocks and clouds like everything was new. Maybe it was. Some things can't be undone. Some scars stay. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to build something good in the place where something bad happened. He'd spent years hiding from the world, from his own guilt, from the war that never really ended in his head. But now he walked not alone. He walked with two people who had every reason to give up and hadn't. And that gave him reason, too. Sometimes, life doesn't offer a clean slate. It offers a damaged page and a second chance to write something honest on it. Wyatt Finch didn't know what tomorrow held, but he knew who he was walking toward it with. And that was enough. The land behind them still smoked in some places. The past never vanished. But ahead, the sky was open, and the road, though hard, was theirs.